AM 1460, the new WXBR. Peter Zimborn and Mike Pava here with you on this Wednesday morning. You are listening to the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM, as has been the case all week during the 7 o'clock hour. We are chatting with candidates for Brockton City Council at large, and today is no exception as we welcome in studio Anthony Doneghan. Anthony, welcome to the program.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Anthony, you've been a school committee member in Ward 3. Why make the jump from school committee to city council at large right now? Why vie for this seat?
Well, I took a look at some of the candidates who were running, and I thought that given my skill set and my set of experiences, that I think that I can give something to the city council that the other candidates don't have, particularly experience sitting on a elected board, elected committee, and also on other city boards such as the planning board.
What made you want to have a foray into trying to be a part of Brockton government to begin with, and tell us about your experience in Brockton government prior to this bid for the city council at large seat?
Sure, thank you. Well, the first idea came to me. I have two sons. One of whom is he's mildly autistic, very high-functioning, good, smart kid who was having a lot of trouble in elementary school. At the time, he was not fully diagnosed as having autism spectrum disorder. It came to light that that's what was his disability, if that's, for lack of a better word. And once we got on that track, I got very involved as a parent in the schools. And it became clear that I could be even more useful to him as a school committee person. And as I delved into it, looking into the matters, going to the school committee meetings, I realized that a lot of parents out there can use an advocate. And in my day job, that's what I do. I advocate. I'm an attorney. And so in the process of advocating for my own child, it got my passion going to advocate for others, and so I decided a natural thing would be to run for school committee.
We're chatting with Anthony Doneghan, candidate for council at large in the city of Brockton, current Ward 3 city council member. Why the jump from ward politician to city at large politician? Why do you vie for the at large seat as opposed to, say, running in your home ward, Ward 3?
Well, to be truthful, part of it was a bit of naivety on my part. I really didn't see that huge of a distinction between a ward councilor and a citywide councilor. And truthfully, maybe it's not naivety. Maybe I was right on the money, because I think when you're a ward councilor, you really do advocate for people in Brockton. It's the same thing as a school committee person. Excuse me. If somebody from the east side, where I live on the southwest side, calls me and says they're having a problem, I'm going to get involved, and I'm going to call people and try to help those people solve the problem. It doesn't matter that they don't live in Ward 3. And I'm sure that that's the case for someone like Dennis Ianieri, who's the Ward 3 councilor, as you know. So I knew that I had heard that Todd Petty wasn't going to run again, and that Tom Brophy had also decided that he wasn't going to run. And I thought, well, there's two vacancies. Maybe I should take a look and see if that's good for me to do. And okay, so in talking to people, I thought, hey, why not? Let's give this a shot. And very quickly learned that there's in terms of campaigning, there's an enormous difference between a ward run and a citywide run.
Let's talk about some of the issues which are pressing during this current election. What are some of the issues that are important to you citywide? Well,
I think that the issues that are important to me are the same issues that are important to the voters and to the other candidates. Certainly, we're all concerned about tax rates. We're all concerned about, first and foremost, the safety of our citizens and our kids. So when you hear stories about some of the criminal activity that's gone on in the last few months in particular, it's alarming. It's alarming to my friends and neighbors. It's alarming to me as somebody who feels a great, or is compelled to care for his kids and maybe even be a little overprotective. I really think about it. So that's an issue that's near and dear to me. And the other thing that over the years you had asked, well, perhaps you hadn't asked, but some of my background as a planning board member, one of the things that we observed was sometimes developers, builders, people who have a piece of property that they want to perhaps partition off and build a house on, oftentimes have a very difficult time getting through City Hall to get that done. So actually that was one of the last things that I did on the planning board, or the last thing that I did behind the scenes. We had revamped all of the rules and regulations for the planning board, and we had given those to the city council, and for whatever reason other matters took precedence, and those rule changes never did take effect. They kind of died in the city council. But it's something that we were aware of when I was on the planning board, and you hear people say over and over again, well, especially people who want to undertake a project in Brockton, they're gonna say, well, it's difficult. You can go online, for example, in Marshfield, and in one day have all of your permits taken care of and pay your fees and everything else. In Brockton, it's a sometimes several week or longer process to get that done. The people who do business here a lot know the uniqueness of doing things in Brockton. They understand all the little nuances, and they can get through it much quicker than somebody who's not necessarily been through it before. It can be very difficult, it can be very frustrating, and it would certainly it could easily cause a reasonable person to just walk away and say, I don't want to open a business, I don't want to do a development in Brockton. So that was something that I thought I could help with as well.
You mentioned criminal activity happening within the city. What do you think can be done to curb criminal activity within the city, and how do you implement it?
Oh, good. Well, first, there's a number of things that you can do, I think, short-term and long-term. So in that order, I would say first, short-term, one thing that I would really push for would be neighborhood precincts. We've tried it. I think that there's one down in Campello now on Main Street. On Main Street, South Main. I really think that we have a great police force. I talked to a lot of the police officers in this campaign and prior to that, and some of them I grew up with. They're a great bunch of people. They're professionals. They care about their job. They want a safe city. One thing that I think happens in a city like Brockton, or any large area, is you might get assigned to a certain area of the city. You don't get to know the families of the people who might get in trouble or the people who don't get in trouble. But if you're in a neighborhood, if there's a neighborhood precinct, and I would even envision where it was somewhat of a community center, where people could go, kids might have something to do, video games or things like that. Someplace where they're interacting, families are interacting with the local police that are assigned to that area station. I think very quickly, when you get that kind of a relationship, I think that the dynamic between the police and the citizens, whether they're citizens who have done something wrong or citizens who don't ever do anything wrong, that dynamic changes quickly. I've seen it on a smaller scale with the resources officers in the middle schools, where they're police officers, they're fully trained police officers, but they spend all their time in one or two middle schools, and they get to know every single kid, and they get to know a lot of the families, sometimes for reasons that aren't so good, but they get to know them. And when you know somebody and you know their family, you treat them a lot different than if they're just a faceless person, a statistic, or a potential person that could be trying to do you harm while you're doing your job.
Once again, you're listening to AM 1460, the new WXBR. We're chatting with Ward 3 school committee member and a candidate for Brockton Councilor at Large, Anthony Doneghan. Anthony, what about your experiences in both the public and private sectors in your past make you think that you would be capable of handling a city financial budget, which you would have to do in your role as a councilor at large?
Okay, thank you. At some point, can we get back to the long-term view on the police thing? I know I tend to be a bit long.
Absolutely. If you want to go to that, then we'll talk about.
Okay, if you want.
Stick with that then.
I don't want to take over.
No, this is your time as much as it's my
thank
time. We're giving the candidates each a 20 to 25-minute interview, so.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. The other issue that's kind of near and dear to me is something that people in Brockton have been talking about for a long time, and District Attorney Cruz has been talking and wanting for a long time, and that would be a sort of a law enforcement center, if you will, where they would combine the resources of the police, state police, district attorney's office, all in one facility, modern facility. As you probably know, the Brockton Police Station is not it's not something that law enforcement people would be proud to work in. It's an older building. It lacks a lot of amenities that law enforcement could use to do their job more effectively. Things break. It's an old building. So I've always kind of looked at that little block over by Pleasant Street and Warren Ave. Used to be I think a Star Market there. I always thought that would be an excellent place for that to go. Now, of course, something like that, I believe, and I hope I'm speculating, not telling you absolutely, but I believe it's somewhere on the order of $80 million to do such a project. So clearly, the money would have to come from federal and state efforts. So one of the things that I am happy about this whole foray into government for me is that I've gotten to know our legislative delegation very well. I've gotten to know Senator Kennedy. I was happy to get reacquainted with Mike Brady, who it turns out he and I had gone to school together. We graduated at the same time, played Brockton youth hockey together, and didn't know each other. But looking back at the old pictures, I say, hey, that's Mike Brady. He's a wonderful guy. He's a hard worker, as everyone knows. He really, truly has the interests of people of Brockton at heart. And he is somebody that I think I could work with. He, along with Attorney Claire Cronin, who's our other representative, who is also a Brockton kid. I went to school with her sister, Joan, and Hugh. And the whole family are just wonderful. And all of them, those three, I think that I'd love to work with and really see if we could put together with the district attorney's office some kind of a comprehensive, cohesive, sensible sales pitch, if you will, to our federal delegation to try to get some funds. Now, realizing that the blessed government is shut down, it sounds a little silly to be talking about stuff like that, but it's something that I remain hopeful might happen, and I will push for. So I guess that's the short answer to my long-term view of how to help law enforcement. I think obviously if we had that type of a facility, that's something that we could share sort of on a co-op basis, if you will, with other cities and towns in the area, and share those resources and get resources from them in return. So those are some of the ideas that I have.
You talked about some of the finances in terms of building a facility of that nature, which you mentioned. Do you feel comfortable helping operate a city budget?
Thank you. That's a good segue. Yes, I do. Right now, I have done 2 budgets on the school committee of to the order of $280 million, I believe. Our budget represents 80% of the total city's budget. Now, granted, much of that money comes from state funding. However, we all pay taxes. So whether we take it out of the city pot or we take it out of the state pot, it's all our tax money. And it's each and every individual department. We have to go in with a fine-tooth comb, and we look at every single line item. On the city level, they don't look at necessarily single line item issues. They have department heads come before them and say, this is what we need and this is why. I sit on a non-certified negotiating subcommittee right now. We're in the process of negotiating 6 contracts. We just finished one with the food services workers. So I'm learning a lot about that end of the government business, if you will. To my knowledge, city councilors do not, and for the life of me don't understand why they do not. If it's ordinance and it's something that I don't know as an outsider coming in, I apologize, but I think that city councilors ought to have subcommittees that sit and participate on some level in negotiations with firefighters, police, all of the various, I think there's 17 different departments, 17 different unions that do business with the city. So I just think that it's so important to be in on those negotiations and to understand the dynamic between the personnel department, the law office, and the representatives of the unions who want what's best for their people.
Now, we talked about some of the hot button issues in Brockton. Let's talk about a few more. The power plant, which has been proposed as a hot button issue. What is your position on this proposed power plant in Brockton? Are you for or against?
I'm against. And if you like, I'll give
Yeah,
you
why
my
would that be?
reasons and support. The reasons why, again, on the planning board, the power plant, the proponents came before us on a number of occasions. And I really did take a neutral view at that point because I had to, and I felt it was reasonable and it was the thing to do. They came in as applicants like anyone else, and they were entitled to a fair hearing. And I think that at one point they came in for a small matter, a side matter, and it was the only time that I sat as chair of the planning board. Chairman McAllister was out sick that night, and they laid out their case. Some information came to my attention later that probably would have caused me to propose a different motion, but the information that I had in front of me that night caused me to say, look, we really don't have a choice here. We're a planning board. It's not our role to try to stand up and stop this thing. It's a municipal board. All we can do is what we have authority to do. They've done an application. They've given us information. We have to act on that information, and we have to give them a fair hearing, and we did. And I proposed a motion allowing their application. Again, it wasn't for the whole thing. It was for I think it was an electrical, something to do with a switching station nearby that they needed to get power over to the plant. But over the months and years that have gone since then, it's clear to me that they have not really been forthcoming with information. They have done what they've been required to do, but I don't know that what they're required to do is really in Brockton's best interest. One of the things that and I apologize if some of my facts may be a little bit outdated, but from what I understood, the power plant, well, the clean energy had to do air quality surveys and determine what the particulate matter that power plant will put into the air. They have to tell you what it's going to be and how that's going to add in the aggregate to the air quality in Brockton. However, the state licensure, in their wisdom, allows areas or regions for them to do their comparisons with. They don't have to do Brockton. And in fact, they didn't do Brockton. They compared or they used the air quality of Logan Airport instead of Brockton. And that was why Linda Balzotti in the past year or so has asked the state to put in air quality monitors in Brockton to get a real sense of what the air quality is in that area, as opposed to what it is at Logan Airport, which doesn't really help the citizens of Brockton. So the health angle is what I apologize for taking too long to get to it, but the health issue for me is not answered. It's not clear at all what effect the particulate matter that this stuff lets out into the air is going to do to people long term. We do know that people in that area do suffer from asthma and other breathing problems at a disproportionately greater rate than in other areas of the city. We don't know why yet, but it's not unreasonable to speculate that perhaps the trash transfer stations that are down there, the sewage treatment facility that's down there, contribute to the breathing problems that some of the people in that area have experienced. The other thing that we have down there is the Gilmore Childhood Education Center. So we've also got a couple of other schools that are in that general area. Now, as former Senator Bob Creedon has said in the past, if these things were so clean, why do they need to give you a 300 or a 250-foot smokestack? And you could say, well, that's what the regulations are, but the regulations, okay, my experience, the regulations for permitting of that thing have not been very strict. So the fact that they require a 250-foot smokestack, or what, and I've been corrected by this, and I suppose it's an issue of my generation. The thing doesn't belch out smoke. Steam vapors come through it, not smoke. So when I refer to it as a smokestack, I'm referring it sort of as a generic term, like, people call Brillo pads SOS. So I'm not saying that it spouts smoke, and I'm not trying to give people a false impression of what it does. But the fact is, it's 250 feet high. It emits things, whether it's smoke or steam or vapor or whatever. It emits stuff, and it's put high in the air for a reason, because it's not good if you're breathing it directly. That's my sense. So that, coupled with all of the other stuff that's going on down in that end of the city, strikes me as perhaps a bit more than Brockton should have to take. So it's not really a NIMBY argument. We're not saying, hey, we're all for power, but we don't want you putting your power in our backyard. That's not the case. It's most assuredly a health issue for me, first and foremost. Second is, there are a number of dirty power plants doing business in the state of Massachusetts. They're in Rhode Island, and we all know what they do. Some of them are coal burning, some of them are oil burning or diesel fuel burning. This one is proposed to be a gas burning, so that it's proposed to be cleaner. But one thing we do know is that Brockton doesn't need the power that it's going to generate. They're looking down the road so that they can close some of those dirtier plants in other communities. But if this thing is going to pose a safety, and I'll get to the safety issue, but the health and safety issues, then we should. Why are we building it so that we can give other people cleaner power? It just doesn't seem to make sense to me. The other thing, too, of course, is time is marching on, and we're all looking for alternative resources. We don't want to be dependent upon other countries for our fossil fuels to do what we need to do. So we're trying to develop things. And of course, the argument on the other side is, well, how many solar panels are you going to put in? Are you going to paint the whole state of Massachusetts so that you can heat a city the size of Brockton? And the answer is no. But at the same time, why are we going to build a plant that we know is going to be hopefully obsolete and outdated in a number of years for energy that we don't even need, that's for other people? So that's another issue that I take exception to. Let's see, there's the safety, noise. They do generate noise. You recall the thing that happened in, I think it was Fairfield, Connecticut, or maybe not. I forget the name of the town in Connecticut a couple of years ago. They had that massive explosion. And that was due, I believe, to human error during, and forgive me if I have the terminology wrong, but they have a procedure where they have to blow excess gas out of the line, the gas that they use to fuel the plant. And when they do that, it's basically a controlled explosion. And apparently what happened in Connecticut was that controlled explosion, they forgot to, or somehow didn't shut off all of the gas that was flowing through the pipeline, and that's what caused all of that gas to ignite and caused that huge explosion that killed so many people and really devastated that whole facility. But when you look at that facility, it was, even though there were areas that were coming up to the border of the property that the plant was on, there were no properties that were very close at all to the facility itself. So these kinds of things, in my opinion, belong in communities that are far away from heavily populated areas.
Well, we know you're against the power plant. We've got less than 1 minute to go, so I want to ask you this before I let you go. Don't worry, you want to explain yourself thoroughly. One final question before I let you go. Considering you practice law, I think you'd be a good person to ask this question. there's been a lot of debate recently on whether or not the city can or cannot breach their contract, or if the Aquaria desal plant is in breach of their contract with the city. Some say it's ironclad. Others say, no, it's not. We can get out of this agreement anytime. We do have about a minute. What's your take?
Breach it. That's the simple answer.
Are they in breach of it? Do you think the city should breach it? They're in breach
of it, and we should. And if they want to call us not continuing to abide by its terms, breach it. I don't think it's breach, but and it's simple common law contracts. That contract has a provision that requires the desal people to actively market that water. And to my knowledge, and if I'm wrong, I stand corrected, but I don't think I am, they have not done anything.
And it's been said that they have not, but why does the city say that it's a, quote, ironclad contract? It's hard for the city to get out of the agreement.
You know what? I'd love to have a conversation with whomever had said that. What's ironclad? Tell me what ironclad is. Is that a leftover term from the Cold War Soviet era? It's simple. It's a contract, and contracts have to be interpreted. And my interpretation of that contract is that there are provisions that really we should not be continuing to abide by, and paying them millions of dollars for the right to water, which we really don't need. And candidly, I've tasted the water, and it ain't that good. Well, it's brackish at best.
Well, that's Anthony Doneghan joining us here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. We're right up against the news break. Anthony, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and I apologize for taking all that time.
That's all right. You're listening to the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM. We'll step aside for a quick break. Mike Paver brings us a local news update. Stick with us.